Hi, everyone. This is Debi Ghate with the Philanthropy Roundtable with another edition of Can We Talk About It? And this time we've got a story that I think people are finding difficult to talk about. Or if they're talking about it, they're talking past each other and at very high volume. And so I want to share with you a case that came across that involves a university professor and a student and what happened when certain words got said. I mean, that really is the crux of it. So we'll welcome in a moment Nick Meriwether, Professor Nick Meriwether with Shawnee State University. But the case is Meriwether versus the trustees of Shawnee State University, where the university officials punished philosophy professor Nicholas Meriwether because he declined a male student's demand to be referred to as a woman with feminine titles and pronouns such as miss, she, etc. Although the philosophy professor offered to use any name the student requested, the university rejected that compromise, choosing instead to force the professor to speak and act contrary to his own Christian convictions and philosophical beliefs. So that's what the case is about. And I want to welcome Professor Nick Meriwether. Hi, Nick. Thank you
Hi,
for being here. And
thank you for having me.
also his attorney from the Alliance Defending Freedom, Tyson Langhofer. Did I get that right or did I butcher it?
You got it, Debbie. You got
Okay.
it.
All right. Okay. So, welcome to both of you. And the paragraph that I just read about the case description is on Alliance Defending Freedom's website, and that's where you can find information about this case. But let's start here, Professor Meriwether. If I may call you Nick, would that be all right
Nick
with
is
you?
great. Nick is
Okay,
wonderful.
Nick. I mean, what happened here with at Shawnee State?
Well, yeah, for those who aren't familiar with the case, at the end of the first day of class, a political philosophy class, a male student approached me and demanded that I use feminine pronouns and titles and that I refer to him as a woman. But the problem is that violates my core philosophical and religious beliefs. And so I offered to accommodate the student by using whatever proper nouns the student wanted me to use. And the student just would not have that. But it's also what was very key is that the administration would not have it. They required me to use the feminine pronouns and the feminine titles with a male student in violation of my conscience, in violation both of my religion and my philosophical beliefs. And so that's where things have stood. I was eventually punished for that. I have a punishment hanging over my head. And so I approached ADF and we're trying to seek some relief on this. But it very much is a freedom of speech, academic freedom issue, whether the university can require me to speak in a certain way against what I believe.
So, a couple of fact checks here. So, Shawnee State is a publicly funded university.
Yes.
All right. And you are a professor of philosophy teaching classes with students about philosophical issues.
Oh,
That,
yes.
that's right.
That's what I.
Okay. That's what you were hired to do.
It's a great job. I love it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's
Philosophy
very
is
fun.
a fun subject. And you offered to call the student by whatever name the
Right.
student wanted. And
It should be noted the student has a feminine first name, and I was fine with using that
mhm,
because a proper name does not imply necessarily anything about the nature of the relationship between gender and biology or any kind of philosophical belief. You can call yourself anything you want to, but pronouns and titles imply my own view. That
mhm,
is unavoidable.
Or
So I could not do that, but I was certainly happy to use whatever uh, proper nouns the student wanted me to use. Yeah.
okay. All right. So that's important to and then what time frame did this take place? So this is the very first day of class that this started. And how long did this process take where there were discussions and negotiations about all of this and then it culminated in this punishment by the university?
Well, maybe Tyson would want to enter in here, but there really wasn't much discussion. It was, this is what you're going to do. And if you don't, then we're going to take administrative action against you. Matter of fact, I was never called in and said, what can we work and asked, how can we work this out? Is there some kind of an accommodation possible? really it was only and always, this is what you're going to do.
Hmm.
I did,
Okay.
there was an, go ahead, Tyson.
Oh, I was just going to say that after they gave the final ultimatum,
Yeah,
uh, Dr. Meriwether appealed through and filed an appeal of that
yeah,
decision, and we
went through
did
that.
go through the administrative process, multiple layers of that administrative process, where ultimately the president of the university affirmed their decision, said that he had violated the policy, said that he had created a hostile learning environment, and imposed this punishment, and said, if you in this letter of reprimand, and said, and if you do this again, you will be punished further up to suspension and expulsion. So that was probably, that lasted close to the end of the semester. It went through there.
Now there's a lawsuit
Um,
that you've launched. And Tyson, can you tell us briefly what the lawsuit is about? What's the claim?
Well, it's important to note that this isn't just about a pronoun. It's about what a pronoun means and about endorsing an ideology. And that's essentially what our lawsuit says. Our lawsuit brings multiple claims, but they all have this. They all have two bases. They're either a violation of Nick's freedom of speech under the First Amendment. So we claim that the university is compelling him to speak messages that he disagrees with under pain of punishment. In other words, they're saying, we believe that gender is fluid and that you can change your gender based upon your subjective determinations. And we want you to speak messages that are consistent with that. And that violates Dr. Meriwether's philosophical beliefs, but also it violates the free exercise claim, because Nick's beliefs are also founded in his religious belief about how God created man and woman. And so by forcing him to speak messages, they're not only violating his freedom of speech, but also the ability to exercise his religion by speaking messages which are different than that. And so
Yeah.
we've got numerous claims, but they all come down to those two fundamental protections in the Constitution.
Okay.
So we filed that lawsuit.
Yeah.
The university filed a motion to dismiss. They argued that they didn't dispute any of the facts. They just said, even on those facts, we believe that Dr. Meriwether has not stated a claim. In other words, even if everything he says is true, we didn't violate his speech or religion by requiring him to speak these messages. And the court actually agreed. It actually dismissed all of Dr. Meriwether's claims at the district court level. We appealed that to the Sixth Circuit, and just earlier this month argued that before a panel at the Sixth Circuit. So the status of the case is currently we are waiting on the Sixth Circuit to rule on whether the district court improperly dismissed Dr. Meriwether's claims.
Very interesting. So this is a philosophical case involving a philosophy professor, and and it's not just about a student here and the student's preferences and the student's point of view. It's also about a professor and professor's belief, and professor in the role of educator also having beliefs that are protected in terms of our Constitution. So this is a very interesting case. Now, Nick, I want to go to an op-ed that you wrote in The Hill, and you explained, I think, what Tyson was describing as sort of the crux of the claim here. I'm reading from your op-ed. What I cannot do, however, is to speak in such a way that implies that a man is a woman or a woman a man. In other words, to refer to a student in such a way that I imply something that is not true, that I know to be false, to effectively lie, and so violate my conscience as a philosopher and as a Christian.
right.
Tell me more about that. Is that the crux of it for you?
Well, there is another element that I would add. That is certainly the crux of it. I think I like the way you put that. I think that the ideology itself is extremely harmful. I am utterly convinced that this is not good for the students. It is not good for our society. So it's not just that I want to protect my own freedoms, which I think that's a significant, that's a significant effort, and certainly worth all the time and the energy just to protect freedom of speech, academic freedom, and freedom of religion. But I think that the ideology itself is extremely harmful. And I simply cannot use language in such a way that I think will result in harm, not only to this particular student, but to the other students who are sitting there and also to society at large. This ideology is just permeating almost every level of society, in the corporate world, the academic world, the media world. And so it just cannot stand without people questioning it and having the freedom to question it, and also simply not to go along with it.
Right, right.
But it's so important for people to know that the compassionate thing to do is not to bow the knee to this ideology. The compassionate thing to do is to resist it. And I think there's a terrible misunderstanding of this. When I refuse to do this, it's not out of any kind of spite towards the student. I like the student. I thought the student was a good student. That particular student did quite well in the class. It's because I care about the student. I don't want to see the student harm himself. And
Uh,
I don't want to see any other students do that. So there's more to it than merely a fight about freedom of speech,
yes.
but that's
Yeah.
certainly at the heart of it. Yes.
Right. No. And I want to go to another passage in your op-ed because you're raising this question of ideology and beliefs and what the
Yes.
implications are of acquiescing
Right.
to them. Right.
Right.
So
Uh-huh.
there's another paragraph here that you wrote that I think got me thinking in a different way about this whole situation. And you wrote, I wonder if my critics would say that a Jewish professor who was fired for refusing to respond to a neo-Nazi student with a Sieg Heil salute, or that a feminist professor under discipline for refusing to use the titles Miss and Mrs. with female students are simply spoiling for a fight, quotes, as they accuse me of doing. Or do they think only conservatives and Christians should lose their First Amendment rights and academic freedom in the college classroom?
Mhm.
So, in addition to the freedom issue, you're pointing out that we treat ideologies differently sometimes in terms
Mm,
of
mhm,
response.
mhm.
Can you tell me more about this question? And I wonder how your students would answer these questions that you've raised in the op-ed here.
I don't know. That would be an interesting thing to kick around with them. The example of the feminist professor being required to use Miss and Mrs. That is an actual, that was something that a feminist professor at the university said to me because she was questioning whether I was doing the right thing, and I said, well, how would you like it if the university required you to use Miss and Mrs. MISS, mind you, and Mrs. with female students? You said I'd be fired first, and
She
I
said
said,
that she'd rather be
yes, she
fired
did.
first.
She's just saying. She said, "Oh, there's no way I would do that. I would be fired first." I said, "Well, then how is that different than my situation?"
What did
And
she
she
say?
and she kind of just looked around and went, "I don't know. It's probably not."
Kind of a solid logical argument there, Professor.
Yes, but the other one, is certainly a realistic possibility.
Mhm.
You can't just say, "Oh, it's only for these, politically privileged students that you have to use their titles, but no one else." Any student would be able to do that. And yes, a neo-Nazi student could require a Jewish professor to refer to him as "my Führer," and the Jewish professor wouldn't have any choice in the matter. He would have to do that or be fired. Right.
Do you think we treat issues of race, gender, sexuality differently than we do issues of ideology that are less visible, such as the Jewish student or the Jewish professor and the neo-Nazi student? Do we treat these more superficial characteristics differently?
I would say that's somewhat of an understatement. Yes, absolutely. I think there is, at least with some folks in higher ed, there is a huge blind spot. With others, I'm afraid it's probably intentional that they would like to see conservative voices, whether religious or just conservative politically, even in economics, gradually shut out and pushed out of the university. Yeah,
Mm,
so the university can become a kind of training ground for this particular ideology.
mm.
For progressive ideology goes by various terms. I would call it progressive ideology or critical theory. So no, I think in some cases it's very intentional. In other cases, I think people just are not thinking through the implications of what they're doing. You never really know with any particular person whether the person knows what's going on or does not. But oh yes, there is a double standard in play here.
Mhm.
Sure.
So that leads me to ask, and I often I like asking professors this question because I get similar answers no matter which professor I'm talking to. But then when you talk to them about other kinds of issues about how that is applied or plays out in real life, you get very different answers. But
Hmm.
from your perspective, what is the role of a university education? Because that's what you're there to do, is to teach
Wow, that's a
is to
big
teach
question.
students. So how do you view that, your role as a university professor in the classroom?
Well, I think that first of all, it certainly is intellectual training. There's no doubt that we are training the minds of the students to engage in critical thinking. Now, there's not really a set definition of what critical thinking is, but there's no doubt that we are doing something along those lines. As a philosophy professor, that is incredibly important. That students learn how to take a theory or an ideology or a philosophical point of view and evaluate it not just from the outside, but also from the inside, to be able to think like Aristotle, even if you disagree with Aristotle, to think like Thomas Aquinas or to think like Immanuel Kant, even if you don't agree with them. I think that is an incredibly valuable thing to be able to do rather than just rejecting them out of hand. So I do think that that's certainly a big role for the philosophy for the teaching of philosophy. But I do think there is certainly an aspect of it that is preparing students to be citizens in a free republic, a democratic republic, however you want to describe our form of government. So there is that training aspect as well. I teach ethics. There's an ethics requirement at my university. I think it's a fantastic requirement. And I say at the beginning of it, I am preparing you to be a citizen of the state of Ohio. This is not just to fulfill a requirement so you can graduate. We are thinking very broadly of being a citizen of the state of Ohio and also a citizen of the United States of America. What do you need to know to be able to engage the ideas and the debates and so forth that we encounter as citizens? And I think that's a valuable role for the university. We're not just STEM training. I'm
Mhm.
afraid we're collapsing into a vocational institute with STEM training. And I think that will be a terrible mistake.
Well, you must be doing something right in the classroom because I was reading an op-ed that Tyson wrote about your case, and there are some quotes here from your former students, and I think they describe how they experienced your, commitment to teaching in the classroom. So, one quote: "I'm a queer person. Your personal convictions cannot be any further from mine. It doesn't matter, though. I respect you and I respect the ideas that you bring to the table of the marketplace of ideas. You made
Mhm.
me think. That's hard to come by these days." And then another student who's a self described atheist said, and this is a quote: "Insulating students from intellectual scrutiny in the name of avoiding offense would be doing them a disservice. You and I saw eye to eye on very little, and that made those arguments all the more valuable to me. I hope that more people can rein in their emotions and see the benefit in having their ideas stress tested by an earnest lover of wisdom." So your students are clearly learning something important in your class. So um, what is next? You have the lawsuit. You're waiting for the decision from the Court of Appeals. In the meantime, you're continuing with your employment at Shawnee
Right.
State.
For the time being, I suppose you'd
Uh-huh.
have to qualify a little bit for
Okay.
now, anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
While the,
Yeah.
law- while the lawsuit is pending,
Hmm.
we
Okay.
don't know what will happen once it's resolved.
All right. And Tyson, what does the law currently say on this? Is
Well, sure. So the key case is a case called Garcetti out of the Supreme Court, and basically what Garcetti held was when individuals that are employees of the state, when they are engaged in their official duties of the state, then they don't have any free speech rights with those official duties. But they carved out a very special exception, and they said this does not apply. This ruling does not apply to uh, public university professors engaged in scholarship and teaching or duties related to scholarship and teaching. And so essentially what the district court did was they essentially held that Garcetti did apply, and that Dr. Meriwether didn't have any rights that there was no distinction between being a professor and any other state employee. And we think that's wrong. And I think it goes back to your question, Debbie, of what is the role of a university? What's the role? Is it different than other public institutions? And we think yes. And I think, Jonathan Haidt at NYU professor talks about this and what's the role. And he says there you can either pursue truth. Historically, that has been the pursuit of truth. That's the role. Or you can pursue social justice. But those are mutually exclusive. You cannot pursue both. And so what's important to know is because social justice says we want to change the world, whereas the truth says we want to know the world as it is. And I think it's really telling in that quote you said, Debbie, that the student said, it's rare that somebody made me think. Man, that's a scary thought. He's in a university and he says it's rare that a professor made me think. Why? Because everybody has the same ideology, because they're not allowed to dissent. We're not allowed to think and critique. And that's a problem, especially on topics as critical as who am I?
Right.
Who am I? That's what philosophy comes at.
No, it's, I can tell you that part of the reason I wanted to talk to the two of you is this case made me think, right?
Yeah.
Because we are so used to thinking about things in terms of meeting student needs and making sure that students are, well taken care of and they rate the professors. And so much of this is from that direction. Students' rights to speak on campus, et cetera. And, the role of a university is exactly the way I think you described it, Nick, and Tyson, you really reinforced that. And this case and what happened in your classroom really was one that raised all those questions in one place. And you're right, philosophy, the discipline of philosophy, one of the things is methodology and having to look at arguments from very different sides.
Right.
So
Right.
here this was happening in a philosophy classroom, and I really, be watching to see what the outcome of the case is and hoping that things resolve in a favorable way. So thank you both for being here today and talking about this case. I imagine this is a difficult one to talk about generally in the media, but we're so happy to have had you today and for sharing your story and helping us understand the issues behind it. And we'll be watching for the result, just as I know the two of you will be keeping your eyes out and hoping for a favorable one. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
You're
Thanks so
welcome.
much, Debbie.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.